In this episode, I'm joined by Alexis Kingsbury. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Alexis. He's the founder of Spider Gap and AirManual, amongst other companies that I'm sure he'll share and talk about. But for me personally, one of the smartest guys I know, specifically when it comes to AI. He gave an amazing presentation at Expert Empires back in March. Feedback was incredible, and he literally blew our audience's minds with how we can use AI, how we can apply it in our businesses. So Alexis Kingsbury, welcome to the Empire Builders podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks very much for having me, Nick.
So let's kick off straight away. Let's get into AI.
Sure.
It's being talked about everywhere. It's in the media, it's in the press. Apparently, if you listen to the mainstream media, it's going to steal all our jobs. What do you think as a business owner? Where do you sit on it? How do we as business owners get the benefit without any of the potential downsides?
Yeah, I love that. And you're right that in terms of media and so on, we've kind of had a period of, as at point of recording, about sort of 7-8 months now of lots of noise and hype around AI. Of course, AI has been in development and at various stages for decades. And really a lot of the noise and the increased hype that we're seeing as a result of the public launch of ChatGPT. And so I think for a lot of people, those things are synonymous, although of course there's lots of different forms of AI than just ChatGPT.
That's the thing. I think because ChatGPT has been so big, like I think if you ask the general population what is AI, they would say this thing. And they would basically describe ChatGPT, whereas you and I know that it's far bigger and far broader than that.
Indeed. And so the range of what's possible in AI is so vast and is changing so quickly as well that it's almost moot, or pointless to try and almost keep up with every single part of it. Therefore, I think your question's really important, which is how do we actually apply it in the business? Because you can imagine, as you know, I'm a bit of a geek for this kind of stuff. My background is management consultancy and then creating software businesses and so on. And so when I saw new technologies coming out of AI that actually looked like they might be fit for business, which they weren't a year ago, I started to go, okay, let me understand this more. And I've spent a lot of time with other, frankly, geeks who also want to dig into this. And one of the problems is that the more you learn, in some cases, the more scary it becomes, and you start looking at it taking all the jobs, or frankly, it leading to the extinction of the human race and all these sorts of things. So it's really tricky to get that balance of research right, where you are learning about it, but you don't end up paralyzed in fear or analysis paralysis, right? So I think, as you say, like, how do we apply this in businesses? And I think if I was to boil it right down, it's about looking at where are currently your biggest pain points or bottlenecks in your business right now, and then looking at how AI can solve those, rather than what I tend to see is the other way around. People start with, here's a cool piece of tech, how can I apply it in my business? And that is the slow way round. It results in derails in the business. It results in the business owner kind of spinning their wheels, trying lots of different things, and then go, oh, and now I found another new tool, and they're kind of chasing the shiny. Whereas if you start from what's the business problem that I want to solve, and then now more than ever, work on the assumption that this can probably get solved through AI or an automation or something like that in a way that even a year ago, 3 years ago, wasn't possible.
Do you think we're going to see an increase in unemployment as a result of this?
That's a really interesting question, because I think it depends over what period we're looking at, and which sector and which roles and so on, and how quickly it kind of happens. Because I think what we can be very confident in is that some roles, existing roles, are going to be less relevant or completely extinct. And I think it's more likely that it's kind of less relevant, fewer opportunities, or they're just lower paid, because there's an opportunity to leverage AI to do them that And particularly as AI develops, there'll be certain roles where you just go, yeah, I don't need to pay someone to do these things. Like one of the things, if we take video, over the last few years particularly, there's been an increase in the opportunity for business leaders to reach their audiences through social media, particularly through the form of short form content in videos, less than 60-second snippets of presentations that you and I have done, or interviews, or whatever it is. And that's fantastic, but generally requires a video editor in your organization or outsourced, and that can be expensive and therefore prohibitive for a lot of business owners. Whereas now there are tools, for example, Opus.pro have got, and there are others, and they're all developing all the time, but that's a tool where you can give it a YouTube link, and then it will take that video and it will create multiple short pieces of content. And so, and using AI to transcribe it, work out, and you can even tell it, like, here's the key themes and topics that I want to be pulled out. And it will use AI to pick those segments. It'll edit it. It'll cut the bits. It'll zoom in on the person speaking. So even if you've got a podcast like this one, it'll pick the person speaking. And then it'll even add captions and highlighting and emojis and so on. And it'll do that in like 10 minutes for a 1-hour video, right? Now, the speed at which you can get that.
This is why I wanted to do this interview. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, and of course, those are examples of where you can take something that would be normally something that perhaps a business can't do, or they would find expensive or just time consuming or whatever, and suddenly go, well, this is better than nothing. Like and back to the lens to use is, what's the business problem? What's the thing that's holding us back? And if for your business, one thing that's holding you back at the moment is getting content out there on a regular basis to your audience that's relevant, what a fantastic way of making that low cost and quick to produce. Now, it's not perfect. And of course, professional video editors will say, oh, well, I'd have done that better, and and they would. But of course, it's about getting you further along the way. And there are technologies available, and they will continue to develop, that make it possible to do more editing at the final end. Because that's one of the things in AI, is that generally it doesn't give you the perfect result that just to go out there. ChatGPT, a classic example, where you can ask it all sorts of things. You can get it to help you write a blog and headlines for your sales pages or whatever, but ultimately you shouldn't just go with whatever it pops out with. You need to go back and forth and help that. And so increasingly we'll see AI tools that allow that more collaboration all the way along, so that you end up with the result that you want.
Yeah, and my view is, I think, if you've got, as we have, an in-house video editor, does that mean we fire our in-house video editor and save the salary? Well, no, I won't, but maybe others would. What it means to me is my video editor can probably churn out 5 times the volume without me having to hire 4 other people to be able to do the same volume. I think if I were a video agency and I were predominantly making my revenue from cutting up longer form content into short clips, I'd be concerned, and I'd be seriously thinking about how I can diversify my business model, because there will be a point at which people go, yeah, I don't need you to do as much work, or I don't need you to do any work at all, because I can get most of it done. And as you say, as the technology improves and increases, the gap will get smaller. The gap between, as you say, at the moment it can't do it as well as a professional video editor, but the gap's going to get smaller and smaller, to the point where at some point in the future, funny, one of the questions I want to ask you is, where do you see this in a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years time? The gap's going to get smaller as the technology improves.
Yeah, and I think that, going back to that question around, so what does that mean for employment? I think you're right that in a business like yours, it still makes sense to have someone who's in charge of video and is both capturing it and editing it. The key is to make sure that you don't end up with a video editor in your business who isn't utilizing AI, yes, and therefore isn't churning out 5 times, 10 times, 20 times as much for the same cost. And unfortunately, that's what I'm seeing in a lot of businesses. You have business leaders who go, oh, wow, I see huge potential in AI, and they'll lose an afternoon to ChatGPT or whatever, and they'll go, oh my god, this like, and you know, we've got people who you know, we gave away some of our guides to AI and ChatGPT at your Expert Empires event. Like I've had people give me feedback where they've said, you know, I read this guide and the following day it saved me 5 hours on this job I had to do. And you're just like, that's amazing, and I love that for the business leader, but that's the tip of the iceberg when we then look at the rest of that business owner's team. Because as I say, for your video editor, what you want is that they embed AI into how they work and their processes so that you're leveraging them for their unique set of skills. Because increasingly, you're not going to value some of the things that previously took a load of time and expertise that can be done 80%, 90% of the way there with AI. What you will value is someone who can utilize those technologies to achieve the result. In the same way as, you know, if you had a video editor who said, oh yeah, my preferred approach is I record everything to negatives, you know, in film in terms of digital, and then I cut it all together in my red lamp room, and then I stick it together. Sure, it takes longer, but you know, the quality of that film, and you wouldn't value it. You'd say, no, it's ridiculous. Use some video editing software, please. And I think the same goes for AI. I think that's the mistake I see a lot of people making is seeing it as a straight up replacement. It's oh well, you know, AI is terrible because it's going to take all these jobs, or we shouldn't use AI because it's bad for copyright and creativity and artistic license and all these sorts of things. And it's like, yeah, but it's just a tool. It's just a better paintbrush and a better keyboard. Essentially, it's helping you when used in the right way and embedded into your business processes. You can achieve amazing, and you and your team can achieve amazing things. But it has to be embedded in there rather than just this thing at the side that looks pretty cool.
What if the business owner or leader either has no interest or hasn't had the time or inclination to really go into it yet? There might be a reason why I asked that second part of the question.
yeah, indeed. So I'd say, so to the first part, like, what if you're a leader who doesn't have the inclination for this, maybe even feels quite anti it? And I've met a few, you know, I've delivered presentations to lots of different business groups, and typically there are one, two, three people in the room who will actively, you know, speak to me afterwards, reach out or whatever, and in a nice way will say, yeah, the more I hear about this, the more I'm out, like, you know, I'm checked out of this. And my answer, the hard answer to them is then, like, that there's a risk that's the equivalent of 20 years ago saying, I've seen this whole internet thing, I'm not keen.
Or social media
or social media like 10 years ago or whatever. Like, it's you can have that view, you're welcome to that view, but that view invites extinction. You know, yeah. I'm sure that during the Stone Age, when people were starting to work on bronze, there were people going, do we really need bronze spears? Like, you know, these stone javelins work perfectly well. And it's like, yeah, they get replaced by bronze wielding tribes, right? So there's always been that. And so you have to be very careful with a viewpoint that says, oh, I'm just anti this. If you've done all your research and you've decided that you're going to position your business in a particular way, in a particular sector, based on a really deep understanding, then maybe you can make that work. Maybe you can say, you know what, the particular type of business that we're doing means that we're going to avoid AI because we're this tailored artisanal like service, and that's what's valued. But people should be very careful with the business model that where they haven't really understood it enough to be able to make that decision. They've just kind of gone, I don't like it, and therefore I'll avoid it. Because pretty soon, you know, initially no one around you seems to know much about it. Roll the clock forwards 10 years and even your grandparents are going to be using it. So it's not something you can just ignore. And so to the second point around, okay, so for a business leader who says, right, I get it, I need to learn about it, but I don't want to lose an afternoon. And I particularly don't want to lose an afternoon and have nothing to show for it. Yeah, so you've had the experience, right, Nick? And to some extent, when I first started doing it, that's exactly what happened to me. In fact, the worst experience I've had of that was when I tried to learn TikTok. And that boy, I think I lost 2.5 hours, brought my head up, was like, oh my God, I need to delete this app immediately. So it can happen. And that's one of the reasons why we created the guide that we created, along with a checklist that's for business leaders and team members so that they can get acquainted to this. And it's a checklist that takes 90 minutes for leaders or their team members to go through. It teaches them the basics of creating content with ChatGPT, creating images with Midjourney, reviewing what other current AI tools can do, and most importantly, considering how your business can use the tools. And what I've seen powerfully, like we work with one of our clients, a training provider, and I was invited because we're doing some work with them through AirManual to improve their processes and so on. I was invited to their board meeting, and while sitting there, like they were talking about their biggest issues to discuss. And I said, out of interest, like I noticed that AI is not on the list, and they said, oh yeah, we've asked our head of IT to look at that. I was like, what? Like, as a training provider, AI presents one of the biggest risks to your business model over the next coming years. Like, how can this be oh yeah, we're asking IT to look at it? And I showed them a couple of things and they gasped in the same way as some people did at the Expert Empires event that we did, and go, oh, okay, yeah, we need to look at it. And they all took as their board action to go and review the guide and complete the checklist. And what I loved was it meant that each of them went away separately and came up with their own view of how does AI change create risk in our business, change how we do things, and where are the opportunities, both at a business level and their individual teams. So, you had your head of marketing thinking about it, your head of operations and HR, your head of finance, like all thinking about how does this apply. And that's the key, is you don't want to lose your afternoon or your weekend to just learn a load of cool stuff, particularly because a lot of the content that's out there on AI is here's something cool, or here's the latest thing that OpenAI have said, or here's the latest bust up between Microsoft and Google. Instead, what you want is the practical application. And we can, if people would like the guide, we can share it in the show notes. But it's airmanual.link/AI/ebook to get that. But like, whether they use the guide and that checklist or not, that's the key, is rather than just approaching it as, okay, I as leader, I'm going to learn a load of stuff. Instead, it's about how are you going to make sure that you and your team are learning things and continually asking the question, okay, so how does this apply to the business? And importantly, as we said, I said early on, and try and start from the other way around. Start from what are the current bottlenecks and pain points in the business? Where's there currently friction for my customers that plausibly I could remove using AI or whatever it is? So I think that's how you kind of avoid that, is come at it from a very pragmatic angle. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
It does. We'll definitely share that link in the show notes and in the description, because I think that'll be valuable for everyone, me included. Definitely need to go through that. The truth is, I don't know to what extent we are actually using AI in our various different departments. So that kind of the checklist, the assessment, I think would be really helpful. And I suspect the degree to which we're using it is the degree to which I've actually, explored it, and it's probably relative to the amount of attention that I've given it, which is enough to understand, but not really enough to use. It's not become an embedded part of how I operate day in, day out. And so I suspect it's probably the same for most of the team. So yeah, I think that guide and the checklist will be really valuable. So we'll drop the link to that in the notes. I'm definitely going to get an action for me is to get me and my leadership team as the first point of call to do the checklist and see where we could be using it. So thank you for that. Where do you, I'm kind of asking you to predict the future a little bit, but you understand this far better than I do. Where do you see AI a year from now? Like, what differences do you predict there'll be from where we are today? And we're recording this in July 2023. So where do you see us in July 2024?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and it's really challenging, of course, because as soon as you start to put time periods on it, it becomes a bit tricky, because when you kind of remove the cap on what could happen in future, it becomes almost easier to go, well, here's the things I know are going to happen. The tricky bit is when. So if we're looking at a relatively modest period, right? 12 months, sorry?
remove the time and just say what can happen, what do you know is going to happen, and
Yeah. Okay.
what could happen, and then maybe we can talk about some hypothetical timeframes.
Yeah, so I think some of the biggest things that are going to come out. So the first thing is that if we look at what we're already seeing in a continuation, so we're already seeing loads of tools out there that are created just like on the back of AI, and there's a risk of that being a little bit of a dot-com bubble, like as we saw in the early 2000s, where anything .ai becomes this like special magic for PR and investment. And so I think we'll see a bit of that, and then there'll be a massive shakedown of those businesses. I think actually where you're going to see some of the more exciting stuff is where you take existing products, services, and tools, and where they start to utilize AI in their businesses. So, for example, if you take Daniel Priestley and ScoreApp, they've looked at their business and said, okay, we help people to build scorecards to help them capture leads, qualify leads, and so on. Their biggest problem was getting someone to actually create their scorecard and the associated report, because it's a great tool, but creating a scorecard, particularly if you haven't quite got the model in your head right and you're not great at copywriting, can take days, weeks, months, and you give up on it and it doesn't happen, and therefore you churn because you cancel your subscription because you've not managed to create your scorecard or the report. So what I love, when I saw Daniel Priestley starting to look into AI around the same time I was, one of the things that I really love seeing from him was where he was clearly focused on how to use AI to solve some of their biggest friction points. And so that's what they put into ScoreApp was using AI to help you create your scorecard. So you could tell it, here's my target audience, here's what I help them to solve, and it would give you prompts as you go through to create that. Now, I think we're going to see more and more of that embedded into existing tools that we already use, and that's going to provide loads of benefits. There's going to be a variation in quality of that. But I think that will help us solve problems. And for us, for example, at AirManual, where we're essentially helping teams to document their processes, their onboarding, give their teams the guidance that they need. One of the biggest challenges we have is where you've got a business leader or someone in the team going, I need to document this process, but a blank page is a bit scary. So we're currently, and we'll be releasing it soon, adding the ability to essentially go, right, I'm creating a checklist. What's the process going to help you to do? What's the outcome of the process? And then it would help you draft the steps using AI and integration into ChatGPT-4 to go, okay, well, these are likely to be the steps. And then, of course, you can change it and so on and add the detail. But by using that collaborative back and forth with AI and even getting it to help you review your checklist and identify ways in which you can improve it based on best practice, you can imagine that removes a fundamental barrier to people solving these things. So that's one of the biggest things I see, particularly over the next 1 to 3 years, is that tools utilizing this stuff to help you overcome some of the biggest pain points that previously would have held you back. If you think about in pay-per-click advertising and so on, in fact, a lot of this has already been implemented, particularly by Google, the ability to create multi-variations on your ads. It's something that we all know we're meant to do. Same thing for A/B testing your sales pages, your landing pages. These are all things that we all know we're meant to do, and yet it's hard. And whereas imagine if AI was basically doing that for you, and each week it was going out of created this other page, you just need to review it, approve it, and now that's live. And the same for analytics. We all know as business owners that we should be looking at marketing analytics daily, weekly, to look at what's working, what's not working, and cut our spend on stuff that's not. Yet most of us might maybe look once a month, once a quarter, once a year, or never. Now imagine if actually you've got it embedded into your tools so that actually the AI is just saying, hey, this doesn't appear to be working, here's why. As a result, consider turning it off or trying something. Like, those are the things that I see over the next few years particularly are going to make the biggest difference.
I think it might be that instead of replacing jobs and team members, it might be having certain tasks performed automatically that you don't currently have performed, but you should, but they're just not a priority. So, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but most businesses don't justify an employee purely to run A/B tests on ads. They have one person that runs the ads, they create the content, that's it. Or they couldn't justify somebody to run the analytics of all the different marketing campaigns. They just, the person that's responsible for that doesn't have the capacity to do it, so it doesn't get done. And I think what we're doing here is we're increasing the capacity of your existing team. Interestingly, you mentioned Dan Priestley. I was chatting to him a couple of days ago. We were on a Zoom call and he was showing me some of the new integration and how he's got something built in that when you've run your scorecard, maybe you've had, a couple of hundred people that have gone through it. It will then automatically create a press release which shares that information. It will say, so, according to a recent survey by Alexis Kingsbury, 67% of business owners say this. And it will create that so that you can literally just copy and paste it and send it off. And so there's lots of things like that. Do you know, I didn't ask him this, is that just a ChatGPT 4 integration, or is that a separate tool that he's using?
In most cases, that's a ChatGPT 4 integration with some clever prompting, right? And so one of the nice things is you can, particularly for software companies like mine, is that you can prototype really quickly, because what you can do is basically say, right, ChatGPT 4, like logging in through OpenAI, you could say, okay, here's some text. So in our case, for example, for business processes, here's what a process needs to do. So for example, how to send an invoice. Here's some context. We're using the accounting platform Xero. It's B2B. It's, we're going to need to enter this information and it's going to need to go to XYZ. There's the context. Okay, now create a checklist that someone could follow to complete that process. And here's some best practice around how those steps should be described. They should be verb, noun, they need to be this length and and export that information in this particular code format. That means that we can then suck it back into our tool at our end to then have it as an interactive checklist in AirManual. We did prototype all of that just in playing around in ChatGPT to make sure that we could get to a point that it could work before we even then sign up for API access and start putting it in, right? And so that's the amazing thing, is that these tools, these infrastructures, etc., that are being developed are going to provide all of this potential. And of course, at the moment, the big models are ChatGPT and Bard and so on. Over time, we'll see a few more, but like OpenAI has done such a good job of positioning itself where it is and being that infrastructure, and where we're at currently in terms of the cost of that infrastructure, et cetera, and cost of queries means that they're in a really good position for businesses to kind of build off what's created. What we're going to see in future is the cost of all this stuff come down, because that's one of the challenges at the moment. Is we might not feel it when we're in our free account on ChatGPT putting in a query just to play around, but each of those queries actually costs some money at the other end in terms of server usage and all of that kind of stuff. Now, a little bit like data storage, when we use Dropbox and Google Drive and whatever, we've kind of got used to the cost of that being really low, right? We might expect to pay Dropbox £1,000 a year for many terabytes of storage, but we don't see it as a particularly expensive thing. With AI queries, initially they are relatively expensive, but that's going to come down really quickly. And so that is going to mean that speed of queries, reducing that cost of it, means that a lot of these ways in which you can integrate it into existing products, services, etc., but will become absolutely huge. And as I say, other tools are building on top of it to make it more relevant, more powerful, so that you're not having to do the thinking. For example, in our case, you're not having to do the thinking around what makes a good process, because we've baked that into essentially the prompting that's pulling it through and then turn it into that. And similar with Score App, where they're making sure that you end up with a well-written scorecard rather than just any on rubbish that comes out of ChatGPT.
Yeah, what I'm interested to see, and only time will tell, is because I think it's fair to say that OpenAI have probably right now are the market leader in creation of these tools. Time will tell whether OpenAI becomes MySpace of social media, or before Google as the #1 search engine, there was Bing and what was the other one? The really early one.
Yahoo. There's Alta Vista, Ask Jeeves.
Ask Jeeves, that's what I was trying to think of.
AOL.
It was AOL. The Ask Jeeves and AOL were the two that I was thinking of. That they were at the time the leader, and they were the one that was innovating, and people were going, "Oh, this is amazing," and now they don't even exist. And of course, Google taken over, and you could say the same with MySpace, and I even of course, look, Facebook's not going to be around forever in its current form, because my kids aren't on it, and they're not going to be in its current form. So but they are on Instagram and they are on TikTok, and so there's always a lifetime or a life cycle for these things. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. And of course, you've got the bigger players now getting into building their own versions. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Yeah,
and to some extent, for most of us, that doesn't matter. Like for example, for AirManual, we can build it with GPT-4 API into it, and then if another one came along that allowed us to get marginally better results for less money, we just switch it over in the back end. The customer doesn't even notice, right? So to some extent, that bit doesn't matter and will quickly become commoditized with those sorts of things, and it will become a fight at their end as to who can do it, who can get the most quality for the least cost. And so that's kind of interesting and makes me less worried about what's going on with the individual fights of those companies. For quite a while, it's actually good for the customer, isn't it? It's good for the customer, because you're going to get a battle between all these big companies to create the best and cheapest, because the best one that's also the cheapest one is the one that's going to get all of our attention. Yeah, and the worst thing that could happen for us is that the others give up and you just ended up with one, right? It's interesting that Google for a long time were ahead of the curve on AI, but they kept everything behind, hidden, basically. They occasionally showed something, but never made any of it available, for two reasons. One being they felt like there was too much risk out there in the world if they brought it out and whatever, which there are some fair arguments to suggest that. And there's some prominent people that have come out of Google now and speak regularly about the risk to humanity of some of this stuff. And then the other thing is, of course, for competitive advantage, they for a long time kind of felt like, well, as soon as we start bringing this out into market, it creates more awareness and others can compete. And the miscalculation that they made was how much progress OpenAI had made and how quickly ChatGPT could get adopted. Because I'm sure from their perspective, they probably thought about it the same way Microsoft thought about search back in the days where Internet Explorer was the biggest browser, right? Because they'd have thought no one is going to beat us as a search engine because most people's computers default to Internet Explorer. Therefore, why would anyone Google anything? Yeah. And that was the miscalculation that eventually caused them so much problems. Now, I suspect Google may have made a similar error by thinking, well, most of the world Googles, they don't Bing, therefore we're okay. And the risk is that meanwhile, their competition is kind of so. But as if they'd got, let's assume that they've got equally just as good technology as OpenAI do. They may or may not, but let's assume they have. Like, if they'd known, then they would have released it 3 to 6 months before, and then that. But again, it's if you don't know that, then it's very hard to make that judgment. Yeah, indeed. And so, as I say, to some extent for the rest of us, it doesn't matter. As long as we've got multiple players there that mean there'll always be competitive pressure that drives the underlying cost of the kind of foundational stuff down, then that's in our interest. And as long as they don't do stupid stuff that results in a super intelligence that wipes us all out, then we don't need to worry too much. But as long as that bit doesn't happen, like, for our own business's sake, we need to be working out how we embed this in our organizations and how we're applying it in our businesses and our processes with our teams. We've worked with a number of clients where they've solved fundamental problems in their business with AI that previously they couldn't do. So, for example, we worked with a podcaster, Anna Moran. Her background was a radio DJ. She created a fantastically successful podcast. But her issue, and successful to the point of getting sponsorship and advertising and making that a real source of income. But her issue was, as a ex-radio DJ, she had very high quality standards for what she was putting out. She was the podcast editor and couldn't do more episodes because of the amount of time it would take for her to edit. It would take her like a couple of days. And so when we spoke to her, and she actually won a competition on our podcast on De-Stress Your Business, where we gave away an iPad and a workshop with us. In fact, that was advice that you gave, Nick, on running the workshop as part of the mastermind I attended. But she attended this workshop, and we identified this as one of the bottlenecks for her business. And so the first thing we did is like document, okay, what's the checklist for editing? Because she felt, well, I can't delegate this out and free up my time, remove myself as a bottleneck, because it'll cost too much. I'll have to hire a £150 an hour podcast editor for 2 days. It'll just cost me too much for every episode. So first we documented it so that firstly, it didn't need a podcast editor. You could use a £25 an hour VA to follow the process. And then secondly, we said, well, where in the process takes the time? And we did a bit of Googling and showed her how AI tools could solve some of the biggest problems. So one of it is, one thing for her that took a lot of time was removing ums and ers and filler words from the episode. And we showed her how, using a tool like Descript, you can remove all the filler words with a couple of clicks, and it just does the whole thing. And then you can edit the entire episode like editing a Word document. And so stuff like that, when you then embed that in the process, it meant that what would have perhaps cost her normally £2,000 to £3,000 per episode to edit, it becomes £100 an episode because it takes less than half as long, and you don't need someone as expensive to do it. And so I think that's the key when you go through that process of looking at a particular pain point. In that case, essentially one of efficiency and cost, you can fundamentally remove bottlenecks. We've talked about examples at both ScoreUp and AirManual, where it's fundamentally removing pain points for customers. In fact, I was talking to a business owner who they essentially help people kind of sell and do outbound sales for them. But one of their issues is that often the customers can be a bit slow, reticent, etc., on providing the kind of guidance that they need so that they can go out there and sell on their behalf. So, what are our unique selling points? How do you want it to describe, and so on? And we were talking about how actually you could utilize AI to help the customer to get some of that stuff drafted faster and remove that as a bottleneck. In fact, what he could actually do is, using the sales conversation, take the recording of that, put that into, using AI, create the transcript, have that then processed by like ChatGPT with some prompts in it to basically go, yeah, here's the draft answers to these questions. Based on our initial conversation, here's our understanding of what your product is. Here's our understanding of who your ideal customer is and the benefits you provide, and so on, all drafted out so that the business leader isn't starting with a blank canvas that means that they take weeks or months to kick off the project with this supplier. So there's all sorts of ways in which business leaders can kind of implement and use this in the business to fundamentally remove bottlenecks.
So the question then that I really want to ask, selfish question, sorry, viewers, we're a client of yours. We use AirManual. You've been in our mastermind for 6 months now, 9 months, something like that. So you know enough about my company or companies. How do you think we could or should be using AI in our business? Like, where do you see the gaps in my business that AI could or should be implemented?
Yeah, if I go strategically first, is to say, to your point earlier, absolutely, it's worth going through the exercise of following the checklist, getting your leadership team to get it, and follow the guidance we've got on getting them to reflect in their own areas. Because of course, whatever we explore now, they will have the real sense of where the pain points are, what takes them the time, what causes the frustration, what are the bottlenecks for customers, where do they get held up. So I suspect that would probably be the best starting point. However, if we were to throw out examples based on, as you say, the understanding that I have, having worked with you as a client and so on, we can, to some extent, we can kind of take it through the customer journey. So if we start off with essentially marketing, we've talked about a few ways in which that can be done. We've talked about iteration and A/B testing of pay-per-click. We've talked about how it can be used for landing pages. We've talked about how it can be used for social media content and video repurposing and so on. So fundamentally, you could take a whole area of the business that currently, to achieve X result, requires Y resource, and you could say, actually, for the same resource, we're going to create 5X. And put more content out there. The other thing that you could do is utilize AI for analytics to be able to help you do a better job of identifying, of the spaghetti we throw on the wall, what is actually sticking, what's resulting in engagement, leads, conversions, and focus more there. Because the risk with a lot of use of AI is that you just end up with more noise. And particularly the examples I'm seeing of that are people who are creating straight up, just creating text content with ChatGPT, and not using a good process to create that, not reviewing it, not going through feedback, all those sorts of things. And as a result, they end up with not that great a blog post or not that great a social media post. Similar, I've seen it for people going, oh yeah, I can use I can use tools like Synesthesia and Steve.ai and so on to create videos with AI voiceovers and animations and so on. Fantastic. But of course, if you've not made sure that they're really well designed for your target audience, that speak to their pain points, that really land your key benefits and provide a good call to action and whatever, it's not going to do anything for you. It's just going to be noise out there. And so that's what, we need to get a balance right of how AI is used there to make sure that you're doing it. But it means that the resourcing, particularly human resourcing, can be used to focus on what works and what's likely to work, and taking things that have worked in the past and saying, okay, let's say there was a webinar or something that you did that went down really, really well. It's like, well, let's repurpose parts of that rather than just repurpose your entire catalog of everything you've ever created, which will have varying degrees of success. So I'd say that's one area on marketing. Sales is a really interesting area. I'd say that some of the areas I'm seeing people get great results on for sales would be things like using AI for recording and transcribing sales conversations. So there is, using tools like Fathom or Otter, you can have them join your Zoom call. And I think there are other tools for if you need to have it on your phone or whatever, and that will then record it, create the transcription, and create AI summaries of the conversation, which speeds up the salesperson's ability to then kind of capture the key, the salient points, put that in the CRM and all those sorts of things. And in fact, with my team, we recently took a part of our process. So when we have discovery calls with customers, we'll ask them a series of questions. What are their pain points? Get a real understanding of what's the impact we can have for them, and explore whether AirManual is a good fit and make a recommendation. We were finding typically after a discovery call that take us about an hour to do all the follow-up exercises. Send the email to them, send them a call satisfaction survey, put all the information in our CRM, post a summary in Slack to let the rest of our team know. And what we did was, we've recently added automations into AirManual so that when you complete the discovery call checklist, all of that, that triggers a zap using Zapier, and then does all those things. And so we made the follow-up less than 10 minutes. So that's a good example where previously my sales team, if they had 4 discovery calls in a day, that's a busy day. Because they had an hour after each. So that's 8 hours. That doesn't allow for lunch, doesn't allow for team meetings. What happens? It means the follow-up from at least one of those calls goes into the following day. You better hope you've not got 4 calls there. As a result, they end up having to either work into the evening, which isn't great for their kind of mental health and being into the right state. And so as a result, that's not great. Whereas as soon as you reduce that follow-up to 10 minutes, now 4 discovery calls is great. That's fine.
What I'm hearing repeatedly is increased capacity in all areas of your business, so that the people you've got can be more efficient, more effective, more productive, happier, all of those things. I'm hearing that again and again. So we've talked about marketing, we've talked about sales. Where else could you see me using this?
Yeah, so for you guys, one thing's that, and as you say, I've been a mastermind member for about sort of 6 months, 7 months. But actually, you and I have kind of been in each other's circles, and I think I attended. First event I attended of yours was probably back in like 10 years ago or something, right? So as a result, I've seen your journey as a company and some of the services you've offered. And I know that one of the challenges that some of your clients have is doing a good job of things like landing pages and brochure copy and all those sorts of things, and sales copy. Now, I know in the past you've had varying services where you've said, okay, well, maybe if this is the biggest blocker, maybe we'll provide this. And so as a result, we'll do like a strategy day and we'll collect that. And then we'll have our copywriters write this for you. And then, and so you kind of, over the years, you've kind of changed your offering to try and provide the best outcome for your customers to achieve that. Now imagine if that essentially that's something you could offer powered by AI. If your team could work out, and I know that you already have this, right? Because I know through the mastermind, I know that you've got workbooks for 6-figure mastermind, 7-figure mastermind, 100K mastermind, etc. You've got workbooks on exactly what you want your clients to go through. However, the vast majority, unfortunately, don't go through them, right? They don't follow the formula that works. Part of the challenge is, of course, when they hit something like, describe your key benefits, or write a 3-pager white paper about whatever, they hit the roadblock and they end up spread too thin and they go do other things that, procrastinate anything that they can. Now imagine if you could say, well, actually, what if we could help them achieve that? What if we could utilize AI so that we have a conversation with the customer, or we get them to fill in a really simple form? And in fact, you could create this, and we could do this in AirManual, right? We could create a checklist that your client goes through with some guidance and with some form fields, and then we could have an automation at the end where they click complete checklist and it sends it to a thing and whatever. And so we could take all of that and create these assets, drafts of these assets, right? So that rather than saying, hey, you've got to create X or Y, we could say, here's your draft brochure, here's the copy that needs to go on your homepage, or here's, and just kind of shortcut a lot of those objections so that it won't be perfect, but it'll be a good starting point. And so they're iterating on their 3 unique selling points rather than having to go, oh God, what are they? It's like, well, you answered our questions. We asked you what, for example, you might say a good coaching question, because again, there's something your organization knows, how to ask good coaching questions. So you might say, yeah, rather than say, what are the 3 unique selling points of your customer, of your product, which your customers really struggle with and they get too caught up in themselves, you might say instead, what's for the last customer that bought from you, what was the main reason that they bought from you? And you might go, yeah, okay, that's an easy question by comparison. And so you might say, yeah, what are those questions?
We can take all of that information, then use it for AI to create a brochure for that program,
exactly,
or a lead magnet for that business or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. And you could sandwich it, right? Because you've got the coaching up front to create some of the checklist, or maybe you do it through a conversation or whatever. Then you have the AI bit that creates the copy, and then you do the tidying up bit that turns it into a glitzy looking PDF, because you've got a template that you use to make it look good. And then you go, there you go. Now, like, tweak, customize, whatever, but that's your starting point. And so, and previously that'd be a nightmare for you to have done. That would have been, that would have been weeks of work.
Nightmare for us, nightmare for the client. That's a really, really great suggestion. Alexis, I could talk to you all day about this. Because what's interesting? I'm not the sort of person that geeks out on this stuff. But when I meet somebody who does, I get really curious and I go, right, like, obviously, my business. So I just went, how do you think I could, or we should be using it? And I've scribbled down loads of ideas there, and there's some really, really great suggestions. Hopefully this has been stimulating for our audience, our listeners, our viewers, to think about how they can, or they could be using AI. We'll put the links to the guide and the checklist in the show notes, in the description, so people can get access to that. So thanks for offering. Is there anything else? Where else can people find out more about you, about AirManual, of course, which is a great tool? Where can they find out more?
Yeah, sure. So I'd recommend that if people are interested in kind of learning more about AirManual and how does it work, and why do Nick and the team use it in their business, go to airmanual.link/discover, where you can find our guide that covers both understanding AirManual, but particularly how do you solve some of the biggest problems in your business around freeing up time, stopping repeated mistakes, onboarding team members faster, and removing dependence on key people. So check out that guide. There's our website at airmanual.co, where people can book a call with one of our consultants to kind of get a demo and explore their own bottlenecks and get a plan to address those. And if people are interested in learning about me or connecting me on social media, you can find me at alexiskingsbury.com, where all my links are there, and there's videos of me presenting and being interviewed on podcasts and all that kind of stuff.
Wicked. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Hopefully it's been as valuable for our audience as it has been for me. We'll pop some of those links in the description, in the show notes, so people can check them out. And thanks again. See you soon.
Been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Nick.